You know, listening to this panel discussion, I somehow got the sense of being in a world of science fiction. We're not talking about human beings. We're talking about data subjects. There's something seriously off balance when we turn ourselves so readily into collections of numbers and values. The first page of this book, actually the preface, should tell us differently. And I want to pause for a moment, well, not pause, slam the brakes on a bit, and explain to you why I think not that this is important, why it's vital, and why an understanding of why we need this is going to shape society's future. And by that I mean the future of business, the future of commerce, the future of how we deal with each other as a society. This word data has very interesting origins. It's from Old Latin, and it literally means the thing given. It entered English a couple of 100 years ago. But data is not information. Data is a set of metrics. It's a set of values. Data generates information, and from that information, derived from data, through a series of techniques with which we are familiar, we arrive at what we call knowledge. Now, this entire discussion, half an hour of it, has proceeded on the basis of what we have today. The ability to literally harvest information, data points, values, assemble them, cobble them, massage them, analyze them, put them through all kinds of analytics, and then design commercial strategies, tactics, targets. These are words of warfare. These are not words we should use with human beings who have fundamental rights under our Constitution. And Puneet's book opens with a reference to the most fundamental of those fundamental rights, which is Article 21 of the Constitution, the right to life and the right to personal liberty. Now, I would urge everyone here, I know you're coming at this from different backgrounds, but I would urge all of you never to lose sight of this. I'm going to explain why in a few moments, but this is critical to an understanding. And to really appreciate why this is important, we have to step back several decades, maybe even a century, and understand how this all began. Take this simple thing, a human being is born. In our world today, the process of data gathering starts at that point. Date of birth, one data point. Weight of the baby, second point. Race, color, health. Every one of these gets a value. But it wasn't like this. This recording of data began relatively recently. All of us have this experience that in our lives we have someone, maybe a staff member, maybe a youngster, someone who comes from the village, and you ask them their date of birth and he says, I don't know. It was never recorded. Sometimes it is. You'll find it in the 1940s records, 1930s records, but there are large chunks of mankind without what we would consider fundamental data points. How did this happen? Why has this happened? And why was this important? This was important from the point of view of administration. It wasn't ever necessary for business. It was, this is the curious thing, it was actually essential for taxation. If you knew how many people there were, you knew what he was doing, you knew what he was earning, you knew how much you could tax him. Taxation has traditionally, for the last 2,000 years, been the trigger for collecting data points and for record keeping for data points. It began in small ways. It was always disorganized. The organization of it came later in the form of birth registers, maintained centrally by a municipality, death registers. Then we had health registers. Then we had vaccination registers. All of these data points began to be collected. But collecting data points in isolated, geographically isolated silos has a limited utility. You have data sets for a village or a town, but you don't have the integration. This data set doesn't talk to that data set. You're not able to merge these data sets. You're not able to analyze these data sets. 2 or 3 things began to happen rather rapidly in the middle of the 20th century. The amount of data that we were gathering suddenly ballooned because now you had other numbers. You had telephone numbers. Then you had social security numbers. You had driving license numbers. You had passport. They all had numbers. You had various forms of numbers that identified you uniquely, but they were still in silos. A police officer, a traffic cop couldn't ask for your passport. The immigration people can't ask for your driving license. Well, these were in separate silos. They weren't really talking together. And we didn't yet have the full imagery of a human being through data. That accelerated with hyperlinking. With the advent of the internet, with greater computerization and digitization, because now something phenomenal was happening. We had data sets, and we were adding to those data sets, and we were adding to them digitally, and we were taking our past physical analog records and we were bringing them into the digital box as well. And for the first time, we were now able to correlate data sets. This generated, well, generated is the wrong word really. It was just explosive. And people haven't paid enough attention to this historically, because my view is that this was like an atomic explosion at a societal level. Suddenly, you are in a position to map a human being and the arc or the trajectory of a human being's life from birth to death and get a measure of everything: health, skill sets, attitudes, preferences, tastes, money spending habits, likes, dislikes, religion, caste, sexual preferences. There wasn't anything that is outside the data mining, harvesting machine. We became data subjects. This is a fear. Because everything about you is public property, is known to others, but you have individuality. You have your right to be yourself intact. You have, as Puneet said, the right to be forgotten, the right not to be mapped. This is your identity as an individual and as a human being, and that is what the Constitution protects. The Constitution does not protect corporations who want to use you as a data subject to further business. This is the conflict and this is the struggle that we will constantly see when we are dealing with acts like this. It is individual against machine. By machine, I don't mean an actual machine, of course, but this entire machinery of data gathering. But here's the conflict in its starkest form. For that individual to thrive in society, to get all the benefits of enriched, enhanced living, that machine is necessary. He needs the machine, she needs the machine, she needs what the machine has to offer. Let's test this in reverse. Let's take the instance of the right to be forgotten to its extreme. When we spoke about data erasure, complete data erasure. All digital footprints gone. I'm not sure that it can ever be done completely, but let's assume that at least the significant, personally identifiable information is wiped. Take a deep breath and think about this. How does this person function in today's society? How? No bank account, no driving license, no way to transact, no way to buy food, no way to get a house, no means of transportation. How does this person who wants to be forgotten even function? What is happening in London when you swipe the Oyster card? It's a series of data points that are coming together, checking the balance. Maybe they don't know who you are. It doesn't really matter. But London's got all those cameras that are watching you. And they're identifying you. And they're mapping you and they're turning into your faces so they know 1 + 1 + 1 + 1. If you want to be forgotten, how are you going to get onto the tube in London? How are you going to do the most basic things without sharing data? Now let me digress for a moment here and tell you where we've had a problem in law. For the last 2.5 years, I served on a committee set up by the Supreme Court. As you know, the Supreme Court and the courts, Judiciary generally, have embarked on this very ambitious e-courts project, which I can tell you about later if we have some time. But the idea is, again, to take the mass of litigation material that we have and turn it into usable, linked data. So from court to court to court, all of this is integrated into one web. I mean, I'm oversimplifying, but that's the overall objective. We've had a problem, and we had to set up a committee to deal with this, with personally identifiable data entering the litigation system. I'll give you 2 personal examples. When I was appointed a judge in 2013, one of the earliest cases I heard with the senior judge on the bench was a horrific family court appeal a divorce case. Couple were fighting bitterly, and they'd been at this for 16 years. That's a horribly long time to fight through a marriage. But the tragedy and the victim of this was their teenage son. There were all kinds of allegations that were flying around. This child was 2 when the fights began. He was now 17 or 18 and in college. And because information about this fight was more or less accessible, he found himself being tormented in college because of what one parent had said against the other in these litigation papers. Oh, your mother said this about your father, or your father said this about your mother. Now, we had this problem with this warring, bickering couple, but we also had this subsidiary problem about how to protect this young man. So the two of us went into this huddle and we said, okay, listen, these 2 adults will keep fighting forever. They'll destroy themselves. But why should we let this child suffer? He's the innocent in all of this. So we found a mechanism by which we were able to isolate the child from this and scrub that data. We couldn't undo what had happened in the past, but we were able to scrub some of that data and take it off. Now, a year and a half or 2 years later, I had another problem. You know, there's this thing called the Juvenile Justice Act, underage person in conflict with the law. And there was such a case. And the case that came before me is that I was a juvenile in conflict with the law. I've gone through that. I'm 22 now, but because of that data, I can't get a job. I can't get a job. Why? Because this data about me lingers like a cloud and will linger. This was a statement he made to me. It will be there as a stain for the rest of my life. I was wrong. I was on the wrong side of the law. I've paid the price. But is it right that I should have to continue paying the price for the rest of my life because the law doesn't demand it? Digital record keeping is making something happen that the law does not demand. This is a huge problem. So we were able to again do this, take that record, put it in a box, isolate it. Now here's the other problem. It's a court record. It can't be destroyed. So now you have this conflict where I need this record contained, keep it from affecting this youngster's life, but preserve the record. Now, this is a really complicated business. It gets extremely difficult, let me tell you, when you have cases involving assaults on women, cases involving assaults on children, either way, and cases of sexual assault in the workplace. These are known situations. We've dealt with them in a non-digital form, and in the non-digital form, they've been relatively well contained. They've been limited there. But it's a simple thing, and let me ask you this. There's an allegation of sexual assault in the workplace not yet tested, not yet gone through its prescribed, defined procedure. We do not know, and we are not assuming guilt at all. This has to be decided. Should names be disclosed? Should identities be disclosed? Suppose, do we disclose the identity of the complainant, of the accused? Does this happen in open court? Does this enter a digital record? When I deliver an order, should it say Miss So-and-so, so-and-so, so-and-so with the name against Mr. So-and-so? Or should it say X versus Y? Can you imagine being on either side of this? Either side of it. Because you don't know what's going to happen in the trial. The consequences could be catastrophic at a deeply personal level. And we have to develop the mechanisms institutionally to deal with this. Now, the question about fines, compliances, regulations, and consents are important factors. I'm not sure how many individuals really understand what they're being asked to consent to. I'm not sure that the Act, for all its wording, adequately explains this. And I'll tell you what I think is missing in this statutory framework. What's missing in the statutory framework is a process of public education. And I would say that for any data intermediary, and I'll identify 2 or 3 of them immediately, because fintech companies, importantly, insurance companies, especially health and life insurance, health, life, accident insurance, motor insurance, you must be able to educate or to tell people what data you're collecting and why. Now here's the challenge. Let's go from the more basic to the more advanced. Let's leave fintech aside for the time being and let's come to insurance. Insurance happens at the most basic level. Somebody's riding a tractor. Okay, it's an insured vehicle. It's a tractor. The farmer who took a loan for the tractor and got that insurance, it is to him, not somebody who's buying the latest Range Rover, that you have to explain what it is about him that you're retaining, how you're going to use it, and why you need it. How does he know? He's desperate, he wants the tractor. He's going to say yes. Is this informed consent? Is this consent to you to do whatever you like with his data? These are difficult questions. I'm not pretending that I have answers to them. Fintech is something that bothers me a great deal. I don't know, did some of you read this report? I think it was in the Times of India yesterday about this person who got scammed for several crores with that usual spam phone call, your mobile number is going to be disconnected or something like that. And she just passed on crores and crores and crores of rupees in online transfers like this. Now, this is the kind of thing that you're going to have to guard against, because mobile number theft is also data theft. It's data theft. All of this is data theft. Data protection, it has to be protected, it has to be kept secure. The trouble with fintech is that it has become so accessible to people that nobody thinks twice about the security systems that underlie it. Now, I'm going to give you 2 examples, again, from personal experience. Everyone uses OTP for mobile number authentication. It's a good thing. Verifies that you're not fudging it, fine. Nobody seems to bother about email verification. Very early on, when Gmail had just started, I got Gautam Patel at gmail.com. Everybody thinks that it's his email ID. Everybody uses it. I get unpaid Bajaj scooter loans, this, that. I got signed up at shadi.com. And once you're signed up at shadi.com, you don't get unsigned up. There's not a thing you can do. There's no unsubscribe button there. Sher Khan is another offender. I got somebody's Birmingham to Durban air tickets. No, I'm not going to either Birmingham or Durban. Couldn't be bothered. I got a threatening phone call, while I'm a judge, mind you, summoning me to a Lok Adalat to be held by the High Court, my High Court, I'm a judge, for a 300 rupee unpaid Tata cellular mobile number. I don't have a Tata number. I've never had a Tata number. I'm conducting the Lok Adalat. You're asking me to come to that Lok Adalat. Very good, thank you very much. I had to phone the registrar and said, will you tell this guy, please stop summoning me to my own Lok Adalat. This data verification, even Amazon doesn't do an email verification. This is a starting point of data error, starting point of scamming, and we fail to recognize that many of these are actually personally identifiable chunks of information that we should be careful about. Now, what does this tell us about the future for business? I give you the example of a person who exercises the right to be forgotten. But now let's invert this. Let's assume that there is a young entrepreneur startup, competently advised by Mr. Cooper at Ernst & Young, tells us that, okay, yours is a great enterprise, but it's an analog enterprise. It's a non-digital platform. I'm not sure that Mr. Cooper will buy into this, but never mind. And how does he do business today? Is there the remotest possibility that today somebody will set up a complete, total, bricks and mortar, non-integrated, non-digital, fully analog? You would look at this and say, this is a Kirana shop. And even a Kirana shop is not fully analog any longer, especially if he's stocking any products from Pepsi, because the whole of it is digitally data-based. There is not the slightest possibility of anybody doing any form of business, commerce, trade, or anything of the kind without complete, deep, and pervasive digital integration. Then it's a question of something else altogether. And this is the challenge before us, and this is the challenge in the book. The challenge now is balance. And this is going to be a contestation that is coming in the future, which is really the subject matter of this. Are we prepared for it in litigation? No. Is there a single court in this country that is prepared for this litigation? No. Are the corporates going to be on the wrong end of this, and are they going to lose? Almost certainly yes. Unless you have devised some sort of in advance, proactive litigation avoidance strategy and damage containment strategy, which includes being able to establish that you have gone through the most stringent security audit possible. If you were to say, all right, sorry, we made a mistake, we'll do the audit now, that's shutting the stable door after the horse has bolted. Courts will come down heavily because courts will see this, I guarantee you this. Courts will see this as a battle between the individual David and this gigantic Goliath, and David will win. They will see the individual rights being trampled on by this great profit money-making machine. They will not see the synergy between one and the other. For any form of enterprise to be able to survive the seismicity, the tidal wave effect of the tsunami of a data breach, and I promise you it is a tsunami, because data breaches are not small. Once there is that data breach and it becomes pervasive, and when it hits the dark web, you have all kinds of problems there. Look, let me put it like this. Let's take the simplest example. You have an interface that requires a user to have a login ID and a password. Routine. Doesn't matter, you're shopping online for, let us say, coffee. You want to buy a particular brand of coffee or a particular type of coffee which you like from Chikmagalur. You're ordering from your favorite microlot dealer. Sign up. Okay. What's the password most often used? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Password, date of birth, something utterly idiotic like this. Okay, so you put in a system which says, no. Your password must be at least 8 characters. It must have 1 uppercase, 1 lowercase, 1 special character, 1 number. 2 numbers can't be together. You can't use the same number twice. You try all this jiggery pokery, and a brute force attack on your system for a 6-character password will smash it anyway. It becomes more difficult when you hit 14 and 16 characters and not before that. This is a design requirement not by the user but by you. Now I'll tell you, if you go to the bank sites, some of them are so idiotic that it is unbelievable. They actually allow the browser to store the password and smash it into the field. How long does it take a determined hacker to enter the browser and to scrape all that data? There are, okay, so I don't know who's from which bank, so I'm not going to say anything, but there are banks that allow you to actually paste. Can you imagine? Paste! You don't even type, you paste. I mean, this is asking for trouble. Many of these systems are open in certain ports by default. They require you to have a security audit. You know, the Information Technology Act, which was our parent underlying act, has a provision there for a protected system. You can get yourself certified as a protected system. I don't know who has got themselves certified as a protected system formally, or what the regulations are from the RBI. We should have this because it makes hacking much more difficult and a much more serious offense to deal with. But for anybody who's dealing in data, anyone, any form of, wherever you are on the data chain, you are the data gatherer for somebody else. You are the data miner, you are the data keeper, you are the data user, end user, whichever it is. People will point fingers at you if there is a data breach, and what you absolutely have to have in place is demonstrated and demonstrable compliance with security norms. Nothing is 100% foolproof. There will be possibilities. The other strategy that you have to work out, which is a legal strategy, and which is why the legal teams need to get into this, is that you have to figure out some sort of a limitation of liability clause for a data breach. People have ignored this. I believe they're ignoring it at their peril. Your legal liability is otherwise open-ended. I'll tell you a simple reason why. Because of a particular data breach, my passwords and identity were compromised. Now, several alternatives. I lost money. Okay. But the loss of money caused me stress. One. Two, because of the data breach, my identity was misused in an abusive fashion, maybe on some pornographic site or something. My reputation suffered. Now, these are open-ended liabilities. There is no fixed limit that you're going to be able to put to this. You would be in serious trouble if you were facing something like this and did not have a structured, carefully designed liability limitation clause built in somewhere. This has been ignored everywhere, and it's not going to be long before, as a natural extension to protection of the right of the individual, we began to see very large amounts coming in as damages against companies. Last, data protection has to be taught. This is where I think services like Puneet's will probably come in handy, because it has to be taught at several distinct levels. First, it has to be taught to those who are going to use the data. Because otherwise, the danger is that people will say, oh my God, in an over-regulated environment, this is one more species of regulation that we don't need. No. This has to be taught. It has to be taught to those who are dealing with it and who are being subjected to it. They have to understand why, what, when, how. All of this has to be answered. It is an even more difficult thing to educate, but this has to be... Okay, so now this is a thought that I'm placing before you. You need to come together in a sort of collective for public awareness as a joint task force, a joint force to educate the consumers, those whose data is being collected, about data protection. Please don't leave it to IRDAI. The insurance company, insurers must come together saying, this is issued in the public interest, please understand what is happening here, what your rights are. This has to happen from fintech. It has to happen from many, many other kinds of enterprises that use data. And the third, and possibly the most difficult, is educating the judiciary. No, look, it's okay. I know I'm retired, so I can say whatever I like, but still. But it's because there isn't the time. Judges are under severe pressure. There's just the workloads are monstrous. They're not going to sit there and learn something in the abstract. A book like this, for me, for example, if I had a case, this is a great reference point because it lends to my understanding. But this also needs to be integrated into coursework at colleges. It has to form part of a curriculum. It has to be part of the judicial training academies where we train our district judges and our in-service judges as well. There's a central academy in Bhopal, there are 3 or 4 in Maharashtra. We must find a way to integrate digital protection laws and privacy laws into those curricula as well. Without that, it's going to be very difficult. This is a challenging time coming up ahead. Okay, if you want my prediction of the road ahead, it's going to be a bumpy ride. It's going to be a roller coaster. Some of you are going to hit very deep potholes. Others may be luckier. But a book like this has one great advantage. It is like that captain's almanac on a ship. It helps you navigate treacherous waters. Thank you very much for your time. If there are any questions, I'll try and answer them. Anyone has questions? Yes?
Sir, it was a pleasure to hear you.
Thank you so much, sir.
And not the court, out of the court is something which you openly took this the roller coaster issue. Two issues you very well dealt is that the community of students being educated. This is where the serious issue. Whether you provide them book or even the curriculum. If in a larger interest, because where do you start? Whether it is from the 9th standard or from the college or from the university campus. Second is, yes, your paternity, judiciary. Whether whether the lower court, higher court, Supreme Court today, CJS is very, very competent with, he understands it and he rightly says, but what about the other fraternity and also the lawyers? So how do we deal with this great monster? Thanks.
Well, on the education for youngsters, for students, the earlier the better, because people are using these systems from a very early age. That's one. For the judiciary, look, our poor Chief Justice has enough trouble on his hands. I keep telling him, it's what he's being subjected to is a human rights violation. It should not be happening to anyone. There's an insane kind of pressure there. But it's not at that level, because the issue when it comes to the level of the Chief Justice of India has already passed through so many filters that he's getting a fairly distilled kind of case that comes before him. The question is, when you go to a magistrate, you're before the magistrate. It's the first complaint against you before the magistrate. That magistrate will stay and say, data manje kai. That's when you're around. That's when you've got to really ensure that he has an understanding of what is data and how you're using. I assure you that without that, if you're there before a magistrate, and the complaint is that he used my data, the reaction will be, how did you use his data? Who gave you permission to use it? This is going to be a problem. You have to show your entitlement to be able to use that data and how you have carefully and within the bounds of the law used that data. But you have to start there at the earliest possible level. Sorry, you had a question. Sorry, you had a question. Yeah.
So the common problem across pan-India is data monetization today, right? And everywhere you'll find some or the other person calling on your numbers for some or the other thing. How this law is going to curb that thing, which is pretty annoying today, right? So be it financials, be it real estate, be it anyone.
I don't know how that can be done. Somebody's got, all right, let's look at the data set. The data set is a set of mobile numbers, sometimes with or without your name, because half the time you'll get a recorded voice. And the person who is calling, well, sometimes I feel bad for them. He's doing a job in some call center. You have got to feel bad. You just imagine sitting in some hot, sweaty call center making call on her. Well, you must be feeling pretty terrible job, no? Thank God it's not ours, but still somebody is doing it. My answer is just be nice to them and say no. That's one. The other one is just to have a little fun, because I remember once somebody called and asked, typical, do you want a 10 lakh loan? So I said, okay, yes. I was very excited. He's saying yes to a loan. So he said, very good. I said, but madam, one condition. Said, yes, as long as I don't have to pay it back. I said. He said, the reaction was not to put down the phone. Sir, 1 minute, I'll call my supervisor. I said, now for God's sake, I'm telling you, I'll take your money and won't give it back to you. But this is the kind of thing that's going to happen. How will you stop it? Now they've taken it to the next level. There's not even a human being. It's a recorded message. It's a recorded message. What can you do about it? You can make any number of laws about this, but they'll find some way to get through. That's the problem there. Anyone else?
Thank you, sir, for a good session. So now we have Digital Personal Data Protection Act, and as well as we have RTI as well. Do you foresee any complications between these
Serious
two acts?
ones. Very serious ones.
And how could it?
I'll tell you, very serious ones, especially about financial data. Somebody is going to start demanding, or take your tax information. Your tax information is subject to what kind of protection? Now, the RTI Act, you may legitimately be able to prevent somebody from accessing your tax information. But your tax information is in the system, is in a purely digital system. If there's a breach in that system, your tax information leaks. That's a big problem. That's a big problem. All kinds of financial, one of the scariest aspects in finance is credit rating. Have you ever seen what's happening at Experian or at Chrysil and how deep that dive is into your finances? It's a little bit out of date by a few months, but it's a really deep dive going back years and years and years and years. So if you had an unpaid credit card bill of 12 years ago, it's still going to show up. It's still going to show up. And people are not asking for your consent, except in one generalized form, before they access your credit rating data. You get an alert after the fact. So and so accessed it. Why did they access it? I didn't give them permission. Accessed it. These are some of those areas which have already become very deeply invasive. Very deeply invasive. Medical insurance and health insurance is the other one. The mapping there is now really down to the last level of detail. They must have to have that detail, otherwise it won't work. You will have a problem in future, sir, with personal information. RTI on its own, maybe not. Data breach, serious problems. Serious problems.
Thank you, sir.
Sorry.
We'll take that as the last question.
Good morning, and
Thank you.
you very much for setting up the context and the perspective. It was very enlightening and informative. My question is how AI generated data will come in the gambit of DPDP, and who all will be accountable for it?
Deadly question. Really seriously deadly question. That's the next book. So just wait. Just wait. Because that level, I'll tell you, where it's become very interesting? It's become very interesting in the context of intellectual property law. AI generated thing is affecting copyright, trademark, patent, brand equities everywhere. This is going to become a serious problem. 3D printing is going to become a real problem. It's going to become a real problem. So this data protection and artificial intelligence collision, the consequences are difficult to describe. It's difficult to anticipate, it's difficult to describe. I think we're just going to have to stumble, try and stop us from falling altogether, and then pick ourselves up when that begins to happen, because you just cannot predict what AI is going to be able to do. You just can't. You are from LIC, no? Wait till they start generating your LIC contracts and policies through AI, then we'll see what happens. All right, thank you very much. That was the last question.